I'd like to thank the Advertising Research Foundation for organizing this event and for inviting me and PageFair to participate. What I want to do today is separate my remarks into two parts. On the one hand, there's the bad news, which is how ad blocking happened, how it works, where it came from. On the other hand, there's the good news, which is that there is an opportunity from ad blocking that I think the advertising industry and publishers can exploit, and which will improve the quality of content across the web. And by the end of today, in this presentation, I want to leave you with the idea that there are two webs, two distinctly different things. On the one hand, there is the normal web with which we're familiar. On the other, there is an entirely different web. It's called the blocked web, and this is where people are blocking ads. These two webs have different rules, and advertising on them works in different ways. But first, let me give you an introduction to PageFair and where it came from. A group of computer scientists emerged from Trinity College Dublin and founded a company called Demonware. And Demonware's role was to enable the multiplayer games like Call of Duty and Guitar Hero that brought millions of players together across networks. Now, some of those people then, once that company was sold by them to Activision, went on to become publishers in their own right. And so from 2010 onwards, as publishers of a computer game site, the founders of PageFair found that they were dealing with ad blocking firsthand. They were suffering the consequences. And as network scientists, they started to look for solutions. So that's the background to why PageFair has been active in this space for so long, and also why its research has become the industry standard for understanding the phenomenon. Now let's quickly recap on the status quo by looking at some of that research. And when you look at the US figures, the figures for the United States between 2014 and 2015, you see that there was almost 50% growth up to the middle of 2015. To the point where 15% of the online population were blocking ads. And when you plot that on a chart, you see quite a scary trend line that moves high and to the right. But we've been looking at these figures for so long that we see something a little bit different. We see something linear. And what we're seeing is a phenomenon that is growing not exponentially, but linearly. And in a sense, it has been overhyped because it is actually growing steadily. There is an acute danger, but actually it's not quite as immediate as some of the hype would have suggested. Some people have called this the adpocalypse. We don't call it that. This is a different story. In our minds, ad blocking is different. It's irreversible, it's incipient, it's inevitable, but it's not immediate. So a better analogy for ad blocking is climate change. And think of polar melt. It is deadly, but it's not immediate. And so you cannot just think about the short term when you think about ad blocking. You're thinking about the slow and steady ebbing away of the audience over time. Yes, it is catastrophic, but it has been caused by a focus on short-term wins, and the solutions have to be more mature than that approach. So think about what ad blocking is. It is a crisis of the commons. And what this means is that we have, as an industry or a sector, abused the common resource of audience attention to the point where the audience attention is now very severely damaged, and that effect is getting worse. And the question to everyone in this sector is, will your next campaign or initiative do this? Will it further melt the ice? And this drip-drip effect, which one does not notice every day, shines clearly when you see the global figures. So this is the global picture up to the middle of 2015, which are the most recent figures we've released for desktop ad blocking at PageFair. You're seeing that by the middle of 2015, we are hitting the 200 million mark. Now I want to show you something that we haven't previously released, and this is the correlation between digital video spend and the rise of ad blocking. It's clear to me that there is some degree of correlation there, and that probably the offender here has been non-skippable video pre-roll. Now we've been tracking this phenomenon and releasing reports for several years. And what we find as we survey people who block ads is that this is spreading virally person to person by word of mouth. And when you think of why ad blocking has happened, I think it's useful to think about an entire ad blocking cycle that describes this phenomenon. And the cycle begins with the need for publishers to monetize content that they are generally giving away for free. And this need leads to entirely unrestrained advertising. In other words, an increase in ad volume and page clutter, an increase in the interruption of the user's experience, and an increase in data snooping. And what that does, in turn, is it leads to a decline in audience goodwill, a decline in the attention to ads, and an absolute decline in trust, and a breakdown of the relationship between the publisher and the publisher's visitor. And ultimately that causes the ad blocking by the user. And when you look at any survey for why people ad block, you get the following list. These reasons always appear. Ads obscure content, or an advertising experience surprises someone in a way that they don't like. Ads infringe on privacy. Ads have an impact on bandwidth and might increase your data tariff charges. Ads are heavy and might slow the page load of a website, or ads infringe security. You will always see one or other of these items on a list of reasons why people ad block in any of the surveys that are available, and they'll be in different order. They're presented in no particular order here, but there's one item that you'll never see on any of these surveys, and that is because they can. People block ads because they now have the ability to do so. So a useful historical lesson is to consider the Blab-off remote control, which was first released in 1952. This is a picture of an old remote control. There are many different models. But although this technology appeared in the early 50s and took decades before it became the norm, I think it's a useful analogy because we can imagine that actually ad blocking will eventually one day become the norm too. So it's useful now to think about who in the industry is feeling the pain and who is actually not feeling the pain from ad blocking. And when you separate the industry into demand and supply, and you start to look at who is actually hurting. So the people who are feeling the pain acutely here are definitely the publishers. And I want to quickly, having shown you the desktop figures, give a sense of what's happening with mobile ad blocking. Because our latest report, released in early 2016, showed that mobile ad blocking is a very real phenomenon. Now first, nobody was thinking about mobile ad blocking before September of 2015. When Apple announced that in iOS 9, their new operating system, they would introduce support for third parties to write ad blockers for content seen on Apple mobile devices. So that's item one. Item two then is that there are mobile web browsers which block ads by default and have been doing so for several years. So I've just shown you here the icon for a browser called UC Browser. There are various versions of UC Web, UC Browser, UC HD, and so on. These are massively popular in Asia and have been running with ad blocking as default since August 2014, primarily in Asia Pacific. Now in January, Samsung announced that it was going to do something similar to Apple and allow users to install ad blockers on its Galaxy built-in browser. And then finally, Asus in December 2015 announced that it was going to work with AdBlock Plus and would introduce a form of ad blocking. Now, actually, in the event, what happened here is that Apple actually did not have an enormous impact with its content blocker. A small number of people at this point have installed content blockers, far smaller, I think, than the initial hype would have suggested. And Samsung's approach will probably yield reasonably similar results. Asus may actually not launch with AdBlock Plus, it seems. That may not go ahead. So actually the real story here is what's happening with those mobile browsers that have blocking built in by default. And a large number of people, you count them in the hundreds of millions, are using mobile blocking right now that they do not have to install once they've installed the blocker. Another thing that we released in our latest report on mobile blocking was a landscape of mobile ad blocking that introduces several different, let's say, hierarchies. On the one hand, there's ad blocking by the network carrier, by the ISP. This is a very, very powerful style of ad blocking, but legal reasons suggest that this will not be seen in the United States or in Europe anytime soon, some initiatives notwithstanding. And so the example there, the best one, is Digicel in the Caribbean, where over 10 million people are currently subscribed, and they are seeing all ads on their devices blocked by their network operator. Then we announced in the same report that it was now possible for app ads, for ads that appear inside the app, to also be blocked. We've already discussed the various forms of browser blocking, and we also then introduced the idea that there are specific apps which block specific services. So what we have here is a hierarchy of ad blocking, where from the top, the ISP has almost absolute control, provided the device is using the cell network. And at the bottom, you have things like content blockers that are able to block certain things on the device. But what was clear from our figures is that the mobile browser ad blockers are far, far more popular in the Asia Pacific region than they are in the United States and in North America. And you count them in tens of millions in China, in India, and in Indonesia. Now, this phenomenon can easily spread to the West, and there's a reason for that. Opera, for example, a reasonably popular, not the most popular or in the top 3 or 4, but a reasonably popular browser in the West, has just implemented ad blocking as an opt-in option. So this is an image of the new installation screen you get when you install Opera. And as you see more web browsers building in ad blocking, it becomes clear that this is a Me Too feature that all mobile web browsers have to include. The second thing to talk about, and I already teased it, was this revelation that in-app ads are no longer immune from blocking. Now I'll show you some of the testing that we used to determine if this was the case. We took a number, and you can see them, the sample we used on the top of the screen, a number of in-app blockers, and used them against different types of apps. And you can see that Spotify, Apple News, CNN, BuzzFeed, etc. The ads in all of those are blockable. So what this is showing us is that although the numbers in the West are currently small, this is very evocative to us of what we were saying back in 2013 and 2014, that this is a warning that this phenomenon is about to go mainstream in the coming years. We have not yet coordinated our data for desktop and for mobile browser ad blocking. But Mary Meeker of Kleiner Perkins, in her latest Internet Trends report, took our various data and produced this chart of an overall picture of what's happening with ad blocking. So that's the bad news. Let me take you through the good news. First, the good news is that ad serving technology that cannot be circumvented by ad blockers is on the market. PageFair is a leader in this space, and we have competitors who claim similar capabilities. What that means is that this image of the blocked web is the wrong image, the image of an arid wasteland where no ads can be shown. And when we think of the blocked web, we see a totally different image. It's a pristine, virginal landscape waiting for renewal. This is the web as it was back in 1995, at the beginning of the commercial web. It's a web with no ads on it at present, and where we can now decide what ads to show on it. So in a sense, we have a momentous one-time do-over where we can correct the mistakes of the last 20 years. Now we've asked ad blockers what formats of ad they are willing to tolerate. And what we see is that 61% of ad block users are happy to tolerate video skippable pre-roll, and higher numbers, 67%, are happy with text and picture ads that are still, that don't jump around the page, that don't play audio, and so on, without being asked. So essentially, ad blockers are willing to view certain ads. They're willing to view video, picture, and text. And think about what ad blockers are. Now, the normal web is entirely affected by attention deficit. But with the blocked web, the status quo, where there are too many ads and too little attention, is entirely reversed. There is abundant attention and a scarcity of advertising. The other characteristic of the blocked web is that its users are different. An ad block user is a person with plenty of attention, ads are scarce, and also this user is definitely human. They are not an ad fraud bot. Whereas on the normal web, a normal person is someone who has scarce attention, the ads are overabundant, and that person could even be a bot. So it is time for us to start thinking about the blocked web. The blocked web is steadily growing as the normal web shrinks. And it is a space that doesn't have the clutter and the ad fraud of the normal web. In a sense, it's a new premium space that publishers can recapture. Now, on the one hand, advertisers and publishers can address the normal web with entirely routine operations. They do not need to change what they're currently doing. On the blocked web, however, there's an opportunity to find new value. And to understand how to do that, PageFair has been running global stakeholder roundtables. The first was in late 2015 at the Financial Times. Then we moved to Mozilla in London, and the most recent was in April at the headquarters of MEC in New York. And we involved people like the World Association of Newspapers, the 4As, Digital Content Next, the World Economic Forum, the European Commission, the Open Rights Group, the EFF, a big cross-section of stakeholders, different stakeholders at each meeting. And what we gleaned from this were a few ideas about how to turn this phenomenon around and better use the blocked web. So I want to share some of those ideas. The first is that on the blocked web, the user should be given immediate tools for feedback, the ability to close the ad, and maybe the publisher then decides that means the user is moved away from the site, but the ability to respond to the ad and to say whether it's good or bad. The second idea is that on the blocked web, we should limit the quantity of inventory that appears upon it, and that by limiting the quantity of inventory that appears in the blocked web, we necessarily make it a premium space, because an advertiser can cut through the clutter and doesn't have to shout over other advertisers. This allows them to have a premium type of advertising that they would not be able to get anywhere else on the web and would normally have to go to a magazine or to a TV advertiser for. And as a follow-on to that idea, think about how we currently use the web in terms of the marketing funnel. Most normal web users are shown ads that relate to the bottom of the marketing funnel. And ad block users are rebelling against this. And when we show them ads using our technology that can show ads to people who block ads, we have the opportunity to show them only premium inventory in scarcer quantities that works for the top of the funnel. Now, a lot of these users are largely cookieless. You lose some of the tracking that you have on the normal web because it is simply blocked. And there's a question about whether actually this is a positive thing. Instead of working hard to try and restore that tracking, why not rely on the context of the content that the user is actually viewing? So this is what you would do in TV and in magazine advertising. You would use adjacency. And is there a reason not to use it on the web? Now we know that for us, for our product, we can work with programmatic, but there's a big question about whether it is a good idea to restore all of the tracking functionality that might infringe on a user's personal rights, depending on the consent that has been opted into, and actually that might take away from the value of the ad if it can rely on context, which is a powerful thing. Now, what these ideas suggest is that there is an understanding of how to address consumers and readers and viewers that worked for TV and ink and radio and outdoor advertising. And maybe it is time after 2 decades for that proven wisdom to start to return to digital. And before I finish, I want to talk about 2 bad ideas that we know from testing to be wrong. The first bad idea I want to talk about is the ad block wall. The ad block wall is where you ask someone to switch off their ad blocker, and only then will you allow them access your content. Now, the problem is that when publishers do this, they must be certain that they have content that is utterly exclusive and that the user cannot get elsewhere. For those publishers, this is perhaps a sound strategy. But for everyone else, The problem is that the user can get the content which is behind the wall on any other site. And so the ad block wall means that not only is the user being asked not to opt out of the present advertising that they may be unhappy with, but they are also being pushed away from the publisher's site and to another publisher's site. So this to me seems to be a terribly short-sighted idea. It may be that publishers are able to get some degree of opt-in from ad block users for a period of time, but eventually the ad block wall strategy, I think, is a failing one for publishers who do not have utterly exclusive and very expensive premium content that is not available elsewhere. And bad idea two, I think, would be to repeat the mistake that has created the ad blocking problem. And the mistake that created the ad blocking problem is the current generation of ads, which might jump around the screen, which might behave in ways that surprise users, which might obstruct the content, which might snoop on their data. And so what we're telling advertisers here is you should not try to serve meat to vegetarians. You can, and is right to, show ads to people who have installed blockers. But you should show ads that solve the problems that blockers are citing: consumer privacy, UX, and security. Instead of just reinserting bad ads, it is important to take an approach that actually improves the advertising experience. So at PageFair, we have a few different ways of doing that. The first is, we do not serve active JavaScript inside the ad creative. We simply don't do that. And that it entirely negates a whole host of security problems facing the user. The second is, and I think this is a good idea even for our competitors to think about doing, the second is for us to optimize, as we do, the ad creative so that it loads far faster. And third, we are very careful around user privacy, and we maintain high standards that keep users happy. So instead of reinsertion, what we're describing here is reinvention. And this relates again to those two distinct parts of the web. One is for routine operations, advertising as we currently practice it. And the other, we suggest, is a premium space for finding new types of higher value with less inventory and with more of a magazine feel to the advertising. So let me summarize. First point is that it is publishers who are feeling the pain. The consumer pain, however, is very real too. Consumers have many, many reasons to block ads, and we have to address them. The third point is that ads can be shown on the blocked web. PageFair can do this. It is doing it right now. But reinserting ads without fixing the consumer issues is a bad idea. And we think for most publishers, ad block walls are also a bad idea. And the final point is that ad blocking has created a new premium space, the blocked web, where we can find new value across the industry. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. My email address is johnny@pagefair.com. It'd be great to hear your questions.